Anyhow, let's look at the main activity fragment. All right, and let's review it. All right. First thing that we have is the main activity fragment, again, will either appear in the content main by itself, or it will appear in the content main alongside the other fragment. If you remember, we're not spending a lot of time looking at the settings fragment because that one isn't really that hard, all right, to maintain the settings, because this extends from a preference fragment. As long as you have the XML file for preferences, you're good to go. The main activity fragment, though, on create view is almost like the on create for a fragment. All right, if a fragment is going to fill up a part of the screen, it needs to have a view associated with it. All right, and in this case, the view is in fragment main XML, and this has all the stuff that's in it in the fragment. It's a linear layout that's oriented vertically. There's a text view, image view, text view. Then we have a nested linear layout to put things, to group the buttons horizontally. So we actually have a bunch of nested linear layouts. So these are like rows. So each of the rows of buttons is in its own little horizontal linear layout. Okay, so we inflate that view. Notice that this method returns a view. When there's done, it needs to return that view. It needs to return back to the to the main activity that's using it. Here is your view. Okay, what are we doing here? We create a file name list and a quiz country list, and they're both array lists. All right. We create a random number generator, and we create a new handler. Excuse me. And we'll see what the handler is used for later on. We created an animation. And we talked about that in the XML, how we can specify different motions for the things. We can allow things to move. That's a translate. We can change the opacity of them, and so on. We grabbed a pointer to a bunch of the GUI components. The flag view, the linear layouts, the quiz linear layout, which is sort of the main one. Notice this has a view in front of it. All right. So far when we've done this, let's see if we have something in the main activity. No, we don't. Oh, let's look up here. Typically, we have just said find view by ID. All right. When we've done this in activities, we've used find view by ID. Here we're using view.findViewById. What is the difference between this? Why do we say view.findViewById here, where in all the other examples we saw within the activity, we simply said find view by ID? Yes.
This is implicitly, if you don't include anything, it uses this.
Okay, that's true. That's true, and that's very relevant. So if I don't say, if in a main activity view I say say this find view by ID, where is it finding the view? In the main activities, did you want to add something to this?
I was going to say that I would think it would be doing that because you're looking at what has been defined as view, and you're trying to make that part of the view.
Okay. Let's pull open an old app, just for laughs. Let's look in, I don't know, Twitter app. All right, here's what I mean. Within the Twitter app, and on Create, we set the content view. We set the content view because this is an activity, and activities have their main content view. When I do find view by ID, I am looking for this view within the content view. So it's implied. All right, it's implied that when I say find view by ID, is calling this, and that is looking for it within the main content view. When I do this here, though, this is not an activity. This is a fragment. So where am I looking for it? I'm looking for it in the view that I've just inflated. This method creates a view because activities have to do that. Fragments have to do that. So you have a fragment. One of the things it has to do is it has to provide a view. So there's an onCreateView method. Well, we have to point to things in the fragments views just the same way that we pointed to things in the activities views. It's just the syntax is just a little bit different to say, hey, don't find this in the main content view. Find this in the view that we just created. So here, I'm looking for the thing that is called linear layout within the fragments view. It's way up at the top, I think. Yeah, quiz, linear layout. So I'm looking for it not within the activities main view, but within this view. So that's important to recognize, that you can look for views inside other views. All right? The find view by ID isn't always looking in the main content view. We can also be looking within another view. And that's exactly what we're doing here. We're looking in the view that we've created. Now, I didn't write this, but they create an array of linear layouts and grab the 4 rows, the 4 horizontal linear layouts that exist in this fragments view. Why do you suppose they create an array?
Because the number could vary, and it's easier to work with varied numbers if you're dealing with an array.
Yeah, and this will remove duplicated code. All right. If you remember, this particular application has a setting for how many guesses there are. How many guesses there are translates to how many rows, right? Because you could pick 2, 4, 6, or 8. So there could be 1, 2, 3, or 4 rows. So it's a lot easier to do everything if you're doing something multiple times if you have it in an array. So they put it in an array. We find the answer text, and again, what we're doing, and this is sort of evidence of that, we go through and we loop through our 4 linear layouts, even the ones that we're eventually going to hide. We don't really care if they're hidden, what their listener is, but we assign it a listener anyhow in case we unhide it. We loop through and we grab successive children in that view. All right? This is another way of getting to views. All right? We know that each linear layout has a certain number of views of buttons in it. 2 to be exact. Linear layout, horizontal row, button, button, and so on. So, we loop through our 4 rows, which we put in the array. Oops. We loop through our 4 rows, and we loop through the columns in there. We know that there are 2 buttons in each row, but we actually wrote our code in case someone later on comes along and changes it, right? We ask how many buttons there are. Actually, more precisely, we ask how many views there are, how many children views there are in this view. Now remember, the view, each array element is one of them linear layouts that has 2 buttons in it. So as we loop through and look at a row at a time, we ask how many children are in that. And we know the answer is 2. So we go for first time we execute this inner loop, we look at button 0. The second time we execute it, we look for button 1. All right? If we added 2 more buttons, then this would be a higher number and would iterate more times through the loop. Now in this case, we grab the button a different way. We actually could use we could do something like this. We could say by ID, if every one of those rows, each button had the same ID in it, but they don't. All right? Each button has a unique ID. So unfortunately, we can't do that. But we can say, hey, give me the first child in this view, which is the first button. Give me the second child, which is the second button. All right, we set the text, and then we return the view. So when we're done with this, what we have done is we've inflated the view. All right. We have pointed to a bunch of things in the view. All right. And we've assigned listeners to all the buttons in the view. And then we've initialized a few other things. Okay. And we return that view, and that's what gets displayed. Now, if you notice in the main activity, we keep track of the preferences, the default shared preferences. We do some settings here. We start the game. If the preferences have changed, we find the fragment, we update the number of rows, we update the regions, and then we tell the quiz to reset itself.
Is reset a specific method that's defined in this?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, let's look inside the quiz fragment. Here's the update rows, here's the update regions, and here's reset quiz. Alright, this is where the fun starts. Alright? Because what it does is it's going to use the asset manager to get a list of images. Alright? And if you notice, okay, it bugs me that I have an error in here. Did I typo or something? Hit a key? Well, I guess we'll find out later. If you notice, the names of the countries aren't stored anywhere except by the virtue of them having images. Okay? So, it's not like there is a database table of the countries and the regions. Alright? It's not like there's an XML file that has those. All of those would be possibilities. But in this case, to add a new country, you would simply add a flag to the appropriate region. Alright? So, what we're doing here is we are grabbing a list of all the countries. Alright? We clear out the name of the file list. Alright? We then look and find for each region in the regions set. Remember, I did lie a little bit. There is a list of regions in the settings. And that gets set. And the fragment knows about it through here. Alright? So for each region that we want to have included, we go and we look for, and we get a list of everything, all the files in that region. So if I picked Africa and Asia, my region set would have two values in it, Africa and Asia. Would clear out the file name list, alright, would loop through those, so first time through would look for Africa, second time through would look for Asia. We would get a list of all the assets in the Africa asset section, and effectively in the Africa folder. So we'd get an array that includes all these things. So we'd get, 50 of them, or 20 of them, 30 of them, whatever. We then loop through, and we add that to the file name list. The file name list is a list of the countries that are in play for this quiz, right? Because you select the countries, you select the regions that you want to be quizzed over, all right? And so, based on that, we're accumulating all the countries for the selected regions. What are we doing here? Once we grab the list of countries, that is file names, what does this line of code do?
It's adding the image names to a list.
It does. It's adding the name, the image name to that list, file name list. What does this part do? Yeah. Takes the PNG off. Why do we do that? Yeah. Yeah, because actually, as far as images go, I believe when you get an asset, you don't include the extension. sure, but we'll see. Okay, so we now, when we're done with this, we have a regions array list, or array, and we have a file name list of all the files that are in play, all the countries that are in play. All right. Initialize correct answer to 0. Clear the prior list of the quiz countries. All right. So we might have the 50 countries that are in Africa, the 30 countries that are in Asia. We might have a list of 80 countries. What we're going to do is we are going to generate a list of 10 flags. Flags in quiz, right? That's a constant. It's set to 10. All right? So what we're going to do is we're going to generate the 10 countries that they're going to be quizzed over. How do we do that? Well, first thing we do is we generate a random number up to the number of flags, which we got by getting the size of the array list. So if there's 80 countries in the list of countries in the file name list, we generate a number between 0 and 79. All right? Once we do that, we say, okay, let's grab the file name from there. And we first look to see if the country is already in the list. Okay? The quiz list. The quiz country list is going to be the countries that are included in this quiz. So just by fluke, we could get China the first time and China the second time. Well, we don't want China in there twice. If a country's already in the quiz, we don't want it in the second time. So we look to see if that file name is already in the quiz country list. Exclamation point means, of course, not. So if not, quiz country list contains file name. And if it's not, then we go in and we add it to the list. So now what do we have? We have 3 array lists at least. 3 that I'm going to talk about. Probably a few I forgot about. We got the regions one that we used to come up with the list of file names. We have the file name one, which we went through and randomly chose 10 of the countries to be included in the quiz. So now there's 10 of them in that array. And then we do the load next flag. All right? What time is it actually? Okay, good. Because this says it's 6:04. I was going to say the hour couldn't have gone by that quickly. Good, good. All right. So, load next flag does this. It grabs from the country list and it removes item 0. Okay? So, the country list starts with 10 things. What we're going to do is we're going to remove, we're going to pop those items off the quiz country list until there's none left. Alright? So we can always grab 0. Doesn't matter what the size of it is. Until it's empty, there's going to be a sub-0 in there. So we grab our next image, which is image 0, which is country 0 in the quiz country list. That is the correct answer. Alright? We clear the answer text. We update the display. We parse the country name. Let me rephrase that. We parse the image name to split apart the region and the country. If you notice, all of these countries' images are the region name dash country name. So what I do is I strip off the region from the country name. and that's the region. We use Asset Manager to load the next image from the asset file. So, we have our little snippet of code that is going to look in the region for that image. Right? Remember, our quiz files is going to have something like Africa-Algeria in it. For us to find that image, we have to look in the Africa folder for Africa-Algeria. So we need the region to find the image. So we get that image by splitting off the first part of the file name, and that's the folder we look into. We do some magic, and we set our flag image view to that image. So the big image that we have when we run this, we set that. We catch any exception, and so on. All right? Make sense? With me so far? So now we've displayed the image for the first or the nth question. Now we have to supply the options, right? So what do? We shuffle the file name list, all right? This really doesn't matter. We've already picked the questions that we're going to quiz them on. That file list is just there for laughs, right? To supply the options, right? We want to supply a multiple choice, so we want to include some wrong countries, we want to include some right countries. So we shuffle that list, all right? I put the correct answer at the end of the file name list. Why do you think I put it at the name of the file list?
What is the correct answer? I mean, I'm a little bit confused on this part.
The correct answer is
The name of the country.
the next image, which is, remember we have our quiz country list. So that's a list of all the things that we're going to quiz you on this time. We grab the next one off that list. So let's say we put Algeria as the first one. So that would be Algeria. Actually, it would be Africa-Algeria, I think. All right? We shuffle those. We're going to grab the first n possibilities, because we have to either give 2 alternatives, 4 alternatives, 6 alternatives, or 8 alternatives. So we shuffle up the rest of the file names, right? Because our guesses have to be what? They have to be one of them that's right and the rest of them that are wrong. All right? So, we don't want to accidentally guess. We don't want to accidentally have our correct answer showing up as 2 options. So we put it at the end of the file list. All right? We then loop through and grab depending on how many rows we have, 2, 4, 6, or 8 answers, and we set the button to that country name that we've picked. All right? So when we're done with this, we have 2, 4, 6, or 8 buttons, all with wrong answers in it. All right? Because we've just picked the first 2, 4, 6, or 8 things from the file list, the list of all the files. All right? In there. And we loop through and we put the text of the sort of thing, we put the text of the button in that button's text. We set the text of the button to that file list. Now, what we have to do, though, is we can't give a flag and give only 6 wrong answers, or 8 wrong answers, or 4 wrong answers. So we have to replace one of the buttons with the correct answer. Alright? So, we randomly generate a number between 0 and however many guesses there are. We get that integer, and we set the correct answer to one of the questions, or one of the buttons that are on the screen. All throughout this, they've been calling a function called getCountryName. And all that's doing is as looking at the file name and stripping off everything after or before the dash. So if the file name is Africa-Algeria, getCountryName pulls out just the Algeria portion. I think now's a good time to stop, because what we have at this point is we're showing a flag, we're showing as many buttons as we're supposed to show, and those buttons have the correct answer somewhere in that grid of buttons, and the rest of them incorrect answers. So we have presented a question to the user. All right, we'll pick up next time and wrap up the actual guessing of that. All right, it's actually kind of a clever one if you think about it. How do you make a multiple choice question where you have so many options and you don't want to put it in the same spot each time, right? So you want to randomize the correct answer so it appears in a different spot each time. All right, but you want to have a list of bad choices as well, right? So we pull from the list of countries all the bad choices first, and then we replace one of the bad choices with the good choice. Okay, that's all I had for today. We'll wrap this up. I'll be over in lab in a minute.